I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now.
All right. So for today's Heartbeat Conversation, I've got Payman Askari in for a conversation, and I think it's going to be a really good conversation. I talked to quite a few people out in the province of BC where Payman's currently residing, but I don't get the opportunity to necessarily have him into a live stream conversation. So Payman's a little linked into the political world in BC, and that's definitely what we want to have a conversation about and have a look and see the thoughts from what's going on there. So Payman, I want to take some time and just thank you for hopping into a conversation here with me. Really looking forward to it, as well as if you could take a couple of seconds and just give everybody a quick introduction to who you are, where you're from, and we'll hop into the conversation from there, man.
Sure. First off, Sheldon, thank you very much for having me. Secondly, I really like your intro video. With respect to myself, I was born in Iran in '83, made my way to Canada in '89. So I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm an immigrant. As most immigrants do, I just figured I let the natural born Canadians deal with politics, and I'll do whatever I do. I'll just run my business, go to school. Didn't really work out. So now I realize it's time for me to give back to the country that took me and my family in.
No, that's awesome. And what we're seeing, especially right now in Canada, and I don't think Canadians are necessarily against immigration. We're against massive and unsustainable immigration that seems to be collapsing in Canada. I'm gonna go with that. Our social programs, food banks. We're seeing cost of living skyrocketing. Out in BC, I'm sure I don't know what the rents are like there, but I know what's happened in Calgary and how much things have shot up. We see our healthcare system, same thing. You got a puppy in the background that wants to be a part of the show, eh?
Yeah.
So it's from when you came, and I think you said it was in '86 or was it '83?
'89.
Canada. Oh, '89. Sorry. So from when you guys had came into '89 and your life up to now, what do you notice about immigration? What did you notice back then when you were being accepted into your community versus what you're seeing right now?
I think the number one difference is that there's no more assimilation. So when I was in grade 2, we had an English second language teacher, and every time I tried to talk to the other Iranian kids, she would pull me aside. She'd say, "No, you can't do that. I want you to talk to the Canadians because I want you to make friends with the Canadian boys." Integration, assimilation, and then eventually intermarriage. That's kind of gone. Now, this started long before I got to Canada. I mean, starting from Diefenbaker and then Pierre Elliott Trudeau kind of codified it and sold this whole multiculturalism thing. So we were on a collision course with this. But if I was going to point at one thing, I'd say it's this concept of multiculturalism, and people. It's not what people think. Multiculturalism is not getting along with your neighbor. It's not, breaking down racial barriers. It's creating ghettos. It's basically saying someone comes into this country, they have to behave differently, and we have to stay away from them. We don't want to force them to assimilate. I think that's the number one problem.
Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think the goal behind not assimilating, or the mosaic, as we call it in Canada? Why would anybody want to see this mosaic? And they keep drumming this diversity is our strength when it doesn't actually seem to be our strength in anything. If you're not communicating effectively with the people that are around you, there's certain hostilities, there's certain fears, there's things that are being drummed up, and some of it's just on a scale of ignorance. So, what advantages do you think that they're even trying to sell this on?
The advantages of multiculturalism?
Yeah. I mean, I hear restaurants. Everybody says, well, yeah, now I can get, a lot more diverse food. Well, shit, go online, download a recipe.
Yeah,
Right?
that's an absolutely weak argument. I hear that a lot. Like people say, there's more food options in Vancouver than there was in the 80s. I'm like, fine, but that, there's more to life than just food options. I don't really. Well, maybe we'll hammer out a reason by the end of the episode, but I don't have a concrete reason why they support multiculturalism as a virtue. But I grew up in Vancouver, so I was in Vancouver from 2014 to 2019. So I was there for 5 years. And I always say, like, the model in these urban centers is the model that they want to unleash across the world. So when you live in an urban center, you don't own your apartment, you rent, just for various reasons. You don't want to be there for very long. It's very transient, so you don't really know your neighbors. There's no community. You get on the elevator, go to work, you're looking down, nobody says hello. Again, there's no sense of community. And whatever money you earn, it goes right back into bars, nightclubs, clubs, whatever, restaurants, fancy restaurants. So it's a consumption-based life form. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, I always give the analogy of comparing people to gas molecules. Like, they want total equilibrium. We're going to take a couple of brown people from here, we'll put them over there, and we want uniformity. So they've created these urban centers such that if you leave from Vancouver, you go to London, you go to Toronto, you go to Singapore, you go to Moscow before this Ukraine war, like, everything was sort of the same. And I think that's what they want. And when you view that as a virtue, multiculturalism just seems like the logical step.
Yeah. And, I don't view it. I mean, everybody comes out against me if I say anything about mass immigration. Oh, well, your parents came from someplace. Or they bring it down to the, what are we even calling them these days? Indigenous, the Aboriginals, the First Nations people. It was their land first. Okay, so let's go past that argument. We were under 2 miles of ice before anybody moved to the continent. So, getting people into Canada, I think where people came from back in those times was to get away from certain cultural aspects or certain aspects of their own countries that they didn't want to be a part of so much anymore. So, of course, my family did immigrate into Canada, a number of generations ago, and, built our lives here. And so, no, I definitely understand that, that Canada has been rooted in multiculturalism to certain extents. And, we've always seen in Calgary and in Edmonton, you'd see like Chinatown, or you'd see in Edmonton like Little Italy. So there's always, like pockets of, certain ethnic backgrounds. And we're starting to see that now, but we're starting to see more of them, and we're starting to see a lot more densification, I think is what the big thing is in Vancouver. And Vancouver's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it's one of the places that I least like to go in Canada, just because it's so chaotic. So between there and Toronto, I don't understand how people can function. And I mean, I'm not, a rural Albertan by any stretch, but I just don't consider the same things as being, that many people inside of, one area as being that positive. And we're moving towards these 15-minute cities where they're trying to pack more people in. We've gone through something in Calgary called blanket rezoning. So they can take a single property and convert it into a 4 or 8-plex. And these things tower over houses. They take away backyards. They change the, I'm going to say that they change the voting demographics of the communities that, that they move these things into. When you take somebody that takes pride in their property versus renters. And I'm not going to say that all renters are bad people, but I'm going to say that they're not going to care for the place that they're living in as much as the people that would own a house, that would tend their lawns. So, I mean, I see a lot of that. And again, to me, it seems more along the lines of, we're trying to change the political landscape to support, well, let's just call it like a more socialistic, people that like free shit type economy and voter base.
There's a lot in there. So yeah. Let's go with the blanket read.
A lot to chew on.
Yeah. Let's start with the blanket rezoning. They're doing it in BC as well. I think what they're doing in BC is more sinister than what you guys are doing in Alberta. Yours is more ad hoc, like, Calgary, they just came out panicked and they're like, maybe we should, mass upzone everything. Whereas in BC, it's more, okay, we want to centralize all municipal land planning in the province. So they passed the bill and they just did that. So now the province just comes in and tells the communities what to do. That's one problem. Another problem is one of incentives. Like, my father owns a piece of real estate and he's begging for these upzonings because it increases the value of his property. And it's very difficult for me to come in and say, no, like, Dad, don't do that. It's bad for civil liberties and whatever. And he's like, well, I don't care, man. I need to pay my taxes. So it's almost like we're fighting an uphill battle. They're taking all these people and they're packing them into these 15-minute cities, as you put it, and that's increasing the value, the prices of rent, because it increases the property value, so it increases the price of rent. So now the renters turn around, they're like, well, this is great. We can, if we have more rental units, the price of rent will come down. And now you got like a mini shoebox. And I'll wrap it up by saying, then you have the let's call it the environmental movement, that they want to take people off of the land and they want to turn the land into wild land and pack these people into cities. So I look at it as a problem of incentives. Like, these people have these incentives, and how do we give a counter incentive to that?
No, that's a really good question. And throughout Canada, we have the boreal forest. I mean, we're like 80% trees, and then there's our prairies, our farmlands, that sort of thing. So for generations and generations to come, I can see, the ideas behind building out as maybe not being the way to go, but I can also see, a natural growth in population, organic growth, to be, if we're maintaining organic growth, then we can have several generations that can slowly build out inside of the communities. And by building out, I mean, again, with the same essential home owner-based values. So where we do have local parks and where we do have green spaces and, dog parks and, the tiny little man-made lakes that they put in these places. So it encourages family values and it encourages community. Whereas, like you said, we get into these densifications, you stand on an elevator, you don't talk to anybody, or maybe you're afraid to talk to somebody, or, say the wrong thing, right?
Yeah, it's, there's other problems with densification too. I'm a big proponent of individual responsibility. So, like, if you live on a farm, your garbage is your responsibility. Like, there's no garbage truck coming. When you live in these cities, you just, you throw everything out in the garbage bin. I'm in Whistler. I was in the city. I had to take a picture the other day. They've introduced like a 5th or 6th garbage bin specifically for pizza boxes. Like, they're just coming up with new categories now. Food supply is another one. Like people that live in the city, they don't understand where their food comes from. They don't understand where their waste goes. They don't understand where actually, we don't understand where our energy comes from, stuff like that. So you become reliant on the state. And when I say the state, in this case, I guess the city. So the city, you've abdicated your responsibility to manage those services. And the city now has that responsibility, and with responsibility comes rights. So they can now turn to you and say, you will do this. If there's a fight, don't fight back. Don't defend yourself. Call the police. That's my problem with this drift towards urbanization.
Yeah, and I don't think people feel safe in Canada anymore, and especially when not in Vancouver or Alberta, but out in Ontario. What had happened is, they had the police chief come out and basically say, you know what, leave your car keys by the front door, so that when people break in your house, they don't end up ransacking the place or getting violent with you. They can just come in, grab your keys, and steal your car. Which seems like a really terrible idea for the police to be encouraging, because it's basically giving free rein. Criminals are going to be listening to the news as well. And, they're going to be targeting houses based on that. Kick in the front door. If you see somebody's keys sitting there, grab it, take the car, and move on. And then what we've seen coming out of Quebec is, a lot of people have gone to security cameras or doorbell cameras. And in Montreal, they say, well, no, you can't show these videos online, to let your neighbors know as to who might be prowling or stealing your stuff. You literally watch somebody steal packages off your porch, but they still have the presumption of innocence, and that's why you're not allowed to post their videos online. And for me, that seems like the most insane thing ever. You know, in our community, and I've got cameras, and I've had cameras for years. We've caught some people on camera. I've caught my neighbor's house being broken into, and the cops, you know, took the video. Nothing ever came of it. And I think that's the other big thing is that unless it is a physical threat, somebody is shot, somebody's stabbed, or it's a physical altercation, the response from the police is very weak. It's almost to the point of non-existent. They make out a report and nothing comes of it.
I kind of I don't hate cops, but I'm not a big like supporter of how do I phrase this? I'm not the kind of guy that says, you know, law enforcement is our best and brightest and we should support them. Law enforcement is a security force, and you know, they'll do whatever we tell them. But I find what's happened is we've disarmed the public and we've sort of handcuffed their ability to defend themselves. So if you remember, do you remember there was that case in a farm somewhere in like rural Winnipeg? Was it wasn't Alberta, it was Edmonton or something, where the guy, the First Nations kids broke into his farm. Do you remember that? I'm
pretty sure it was in Alberta. Yeah, I know which case you're talking about. The farmer came out, shot into the darkness, ended up hitting one of the people that was, I don't know if they stole his truck. I don't remember all the specific details, but that's the one. And yeah, it's not the people, the criminals that are being charged. It's the homeowners.
Yeah, so sorry, I didn't know that was Alberta, but I look at that case. So the guy was defending himself. These kids were drunk, driving drunk. They'd broken into another farm. I think he had his wife in there, his son. They almost ran his son over. And then, so he's exonerated. The lawyers in Ontario, like in Toronto, they come out protesting against this guy. And then Trudeau or his justice minister comes out and says, this isn't right. Like when you do these things, you signal to the people, like, if, you know, don't defend yourself. Basically, that's what's happening. They want a monopoly on the right to defend the citizens. So the citizens can't do it themselves. The police can do it. And that's what's going on here.
And I think a big part of that is because we have a lot of confusion, you know, in Canada. A lot of the shows that we watched are U.S. based. So I would say along those lines, the right to defend your property. I think everybody assumes more of what we've seen on TV through the Second Amendment right inside of the United States than we see for, you know, any actual laws that exist in Canada that, you know, are basically in favor of you know, criminals coming in and stealing your shit or attacking you or damaging your property. You know, and I think that the slow response to the no response, it empowers the criminals. And again, I just believe it's making Canadians feel less safe as a whole.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I think it was in grade 5, and our social studies teacher was telling us about castle doctrine, you know, stand your ground. And she said, in America, and this is how she presented it, goes, in America, you can kill someone just for stepping on your property. Like, she made it sound like Americans are these lunatic, extreme, aggressive murderers. But, you know, if somebody breaking into your house and is threatening your family, I think you absolutely have a right to defend yourself. There was that other case where somebody was tried to kill this guy's mom, and he either shot her or stabbed him, and they arrested him. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't.
That was
yeah. Go ahead.
That was just the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think we'd seen a couple of stores that had been robbed too, and I'm not sure if this is in the United States or Canada, but you know, the stores are being robbed. The store owner, or you know, whoever's working there at the time, defends the territory, busts down whoever's trying to ransack the place, and they're the ones that end up getting charged, not the thug that was in there to steal more stuff.
Right. You see it happening more and more, and like us citizens, we look at this and we're kind of bewildered. We're like, what the hell's going on? Why is this happening? Well, what's happening is the winner here is the government, because when you defend your property, you're empowering yourself as an individual. But what the government wants is, no, don't defend the property, call the police. The more you call the police, the more cops we have to hire, the bigger the government gets. And this goes back to what I said about incentives. Like I always say government is like a black hole. Like once he's, you know, it reaches a critical mass, and then it just gobbles up more and more money and more tax base. And it's very difficult to reverse this now.
Yeah, and you know what we see is, of course, right now, like one of the big stories inside of Canada politics is the corporate greed that they talk about. You know, the especially the NDP. Jagmeet Singh has been, you know, attacking Loblaws for months now. He's not, of course, going against Costco or Walmart or Safeway or Co-op, Sobeys, Metro, you know, a lot of the other grocery stores that we see across Canada. He's going after Loblaws very specifically. And I don't know if things have started to change in BC as much as they have in Alberta, but every grocery store that I go into in Calgary now, they have automatic gates so that you can't just run in or run out. You have to wait for the gates to release you. And that's to, you know, hopefully cut down on the amount of theft. Because I think the one thing that people don't seem to realize is how much theft actually adds to the cost of the goods that we're purchasing. So when a store, you know, sees, you know, let's call it $100,000 worth of theft throughout multiple chain stores, they have to increase the prices of everything in order to get those funds back, because they're still responsible to, like Loblaws, to shareholders, or they're still responsible for making profit or being able to keep their doors open. So those thefts basically are, you know, additional costs, just like government theft, you know, putting taxes on more and more stuff. There's no way that it cannot raise the price. Businesses go into business for one specific reason. It's not to make the world a better place. Those are nonprofit organizations, and even a lot of those are corrupt. But businesses go into business, and especially in like these grocery chains. And I'm not going to defend Walmart, and I'm not going to defend Loblaws, but I understand the reason that they have to take these measures. Even up to there was a huge hubbub about I'm not sure. I think it was Walmart, where to exit they were starting to check receipts. And in Costco, if you go to the self-checkout lines, there's somebody there that's asking to see your ID to make sure it matches with your Costco card, because they realize it's a problem. You know, they realize theft is a problem. But then there's this pushback, and then you know, then it falls into this, well, it's racial profiling. Well, no, if everybody's being checked evenly, how is it racial anything? How is it not just a store trying to make sure that, you know, your cost of goods are being maintained, because they're maintaining or lowering the possibility of loss through theft?
I look at it as like a problem of government intervention. I as you can tell, I totally hate government. So government's coming in and they're saying, let's take California. They're saying that anything below, what is it, $950, you can't arrest them. You know, it's like a minor charge, so the police just don't bother showing up. So when you do that, and on the other hand, the government, if you try to beat up these guys that are stealing your product, the government throws you in jail. Like, what other option do you have? Like, you have to increase the price of your goods. As you mentioned, it's like a hidden tax. So if we reduce government, if we reduce the judiciary, if we reduce these insane activist rulings from these judges that are, like you said, they said, you know, this is racist to stop a shoplifter, like, society would work a lot better. I'm a big proponent of free markets. Like, just let the goddamn grocery store figure out how to run their business. Don't handcuff them, but obviously don't give them kickbacks either. Like, don't give them transfers. I'm not a supporter of corporate welfare either. But regarding Jagmeet Singh, like, I think that's just a messaging. Like, some marketing firm probably told him, like, listen, this whole getting people to pay their fair share slogan isn't resonating. Let's go after Loblaws. And he's like, all right, yeah, sure, why not? Everybody hates corporations. so Loblaws is like the punching bag of Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah. No, and now you are actually running for a federal position inside of your riding, and I'm sure that you're seeing a lot of the same problems that we're seeing. And I don't know the extent of what you're seeing in relation to what we hear about what's going on in BC. So with the legalization of narcotics and safe supply in BC, you know, from a conservative standpoint, which I'm guessing to a large extent you're not about bigger government and more regulations. What are you actually seeing? Like, our streets and inside of Whistler or in Vancouver? Is it as bad as what people say?
So I'll say that the problem, the drug epidemics, was way before they legalized it. So we have
Yes.
we call it the Lower East Side, Hastings and Maine. Like it is just horrible. Whenever people come from abroad, when I have people coming visiting me from Europe or the Middle East, I take them there, and they're just like, "What is this?" Because everyone's like shooting up. All this talk about these tent cities in San Francisco, we've had them in Vancouver for decades. So the problem predated the legalization of narcotics, but at some point around 2019, even before the so-called pandemic came around, I noticed that there was a lot more homeless people. There was a lot more people drinking at like 5, 6 in the morning when I was going to work. And then when COVID hit, they just thought it was a great idea. Why don't we take these homeless people and we'll put them in hotels? Again, this is the way government works. Like if the government is required to pay for the hotel for these people, that means it's like an increase in sales because you can increase your tax base and you can pay and you have more power. So now you have like entire areas of Vancouver that smell perpetually like urine because you got all this high concentration of homeless people. And I don't know how women walk around that city. It's spilling out to the suburbs as well. West Vancouver, which used to be a very affluent neighborhood, it's starting to get homeless people. I've seen homeless people in Whistler as well. This is a tourist resort. Like I've never seen homeless people before. So yes, drugs are a problem, but I think the homelessness is a bigger problem.
It is, and of course, the cost of housing right now is only going to see more people hitting the streets. And I think it's a desperation thing that basically feeds these things on. You've worked a good portion of your life. You held your job. You bought your home. Now you can't afford your house. Bank forecloses. You're out on the streets. You can't afford to rent the house that you used to own. You slip into drugs. You live in a tent, and the problem just perpetuates outward. So the more that we see, and I'm going to say that this is again through unsustainable mass immigration, the higher the cost of living, and then of course the interest rates, which are driven by reckless spending on part of the coalition liberal NDP government, that's caused this. Inflation rates, what it's driving is it's driving Canada into the toilet. We're becoming, let's call it a third world shithole. I mean, we're still far from it, but how much more of this do we have to see to realize that, if we keep perpetuating the problems, that the situation is going to perpetuate as well.
I'll pick up on what you said with immigration. I always say immigration is the gasoline that they're throwing on a dumpster fire. And the dumpster fire for housing, at least, I trace it back to 2001. Like the property values just took off in 2001 and the money supply took off as well. So I guess they just kept the interest rates low. And people who knew what they were doing, they just took the money and started buying property and driving the prices up. And then 2015, we get Trudeau, just right before he came into power, but throughout his entire administration, the investment in the country, so private investment in things other than land, like it just plummeted. So no one's investing in. What I'm trying to say is like Canada has nothing except land. Like all the money, everyone's money is going in land and housing. So the price of the houses are going up. You're absolutely right. People are getting, they can't pay their mortgages, they can't afford rent, and this is unsustainable. Like unless they want a revolution or a massive rebellion, this is unsustainable.
Yeah, and even on the crime side of things, when we talk about the policing and what's going on inside of some of these places, I'm not sure how it is in with political support there, but in certain communities, and especially you have the drug problem, you have the tent cities. Here in Alberta, in Edmonton, we had a lot of the members of Legislative Assembly on the NDP side, because Edmonton is 100% orange, is they were coming out and defending these people, being inside of communities. And again, we're looking at a few different issues. We're looking at, the use of drugs. So inside of these tent cities and inside of communities, they're finding drug paraphernalia being left out in playgrounds. Then you also have, when people go to work, if they forget to lock their garage, or at nighttime if they forget to lock their vehicle. And I have this in my own neighborhood as well. Their vehicles get broken into, or their garages get, robbed, steal whatever they want. And then and then it's just the actual, using the streets as toilets, and then having these hideous things instead of places of, where we had once beautiful parks, where we had, people that weren't afraid to walk out in the streets. We now have, basically public urinals. We've turned these places into public toilets. With the crime factor, and I think Polyev went over this inside of BC, is the catch and release programs where, you have the same, I don't know if it was like 600 people that have committed, 2 to 3 crimes per day that they get arrested on, and they're instantly released. Is that another big problem that you guys are noticing, around BC?
The catch and release thing, I actually don't know about that. I hadn't thought about that. But like, it's a problem. Like, how do you deal with it when the cost of land is going up? So you got these people that are being evicted and now they're homeless. Realistically, like, you can't throw these people in jail. Like, it's a problem that I think we're kind of lying to ourselves. We're pretending like there's no problem and it's not going to get worse. But like, these are ordinary people. These aren't, like, normally homelessness is supposed to be restricted to a very, very small percentage of the population. And now you have, like, people, as you said, who previously owned homes and now they're homeless. They're not going to go away. Like, you got to either give them services for, like, bathroom services and give them housing. But that's not going to work if the problem is going to continue getting bigger and bigger. So this is the problem I'm having with Canada right now. Like, let's go back to immigration. For as long as I can remember, people have been telling us we have an aging population, so we need to bring in immigrants. So I don't know. Like, apparently Canada is the single nation on the planet that's got a perpetually aging population. But if they were honest with us and they said, our birth rate's too low, and we need to get it up. Here are the options. And if they had said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have kids. Then if the nation had come out and said, all right, fine, then we're going to do a population replacement strategy. We're going to get other people to come in and immigrate. It's almost like society would have worked a lot better. And I'm getting the same sense now with homelessness. Like, we're not addressing the underlying problem, which is the poverty, is what I'm saying. The indebtedness, the level of debt that we have as a nation.
Well, yeah, and then, of course, we want to focus on, STEMs. We want to have, if we are getting people in, we want to make sure that we have the right, not the right type of people. We want to make sure that we don't have unskilled, uneducated mass laborers. I mean, you can get those. I mean, they're a dime a dozen. You can get them anytime, anywhere. We don't need more of them per se in any country. And I used to work in staffing, and, I was a national accounts manager. And, on the aging population, to deal with the aging population, there are, I'm going to say in the Atlantic provinces, a larger issue with this. And that I know that Prince Edward Island, when I started to pull the statistics on this, and what I was literally looking at doing was looking for international solutions. So immigrating people from other countries to work in the healthcare industry inside of, again, across Canada. But PEI was a big one, because when I started digging into the statistics between immigration, emigration, mortality, and a low birth rate, they had lost like 0.5% of their population. And it's not a big thing, but no, you're not keeping hospitals open if you're not having if you're not growing or organically again. So, there's a very extreme situation there. And then I found, not the exact same problems and the same things in like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, but the rate of population growth wasn't sustaining itself. So, where they had issues in keeping hospitals or long-term care facilities for the elderly open because they couldn't find staffing. Some of it was to do with policies, and that, there was only so much budget that was afforded towards staffing members. So they could only afford less than full-time employees. So as a staffing agency, what you'd want to do is try and fill in these positions. But if if we try to do that in Nova Scotia, in between the centers, there's the driving distance isn't conducive to have one person that can drive and work at 2 to 3 different places as a part-time employee to get full-time hours. And then once as a staffing agency, you get them up to a full-time equivalent, then you have to pay them as a full-time equivalent instead of a part-time. So it turns into this huge nightmare of logistics on how to pay and and how to deal with the problem. So more bureaucracy basically getting in the way of those things.
Another thing I didn't understand. Why do we need to give people immigration to get workers over here? Like, you could just give them temporary worker status. So nobody ever answered that question for me. So if you have a hospital and you're short staffed by 100 people, you don't have to give them immigration, right? You could just bring labor in.
You can, and there's actually, like, the way when I worked around it, you had to go through the LMIA, so you had to make sure that there wasn't any people that you could basically hire inside of, like, that you weren't going to be giving jobs to foreign workers where Canadians could basically pick up. So you had to go through these LMIA reports, and then you had to find the right candidates. And in finding the right candidates, they had to have, a certain level of English-speaking skills. They had to have finances that would support them when they landed here. And then even in order for them to be able to become Canadians, is they had to work at that same place for 2 years before they could even apply. Now, I think that's fair, that if somebody is putting the time into the community, somebody did come over for the right reasons, and they work towards that, I think it's a fair deal. Now, if for whatever reason they were fired or left their job, like they couldn't go job hunting. You couldn't cross the street for 25 cents more an hour, because that would restart the clock. So they're more incentivized to keep hold of a position than they would be as if they could come over, like the new idea of, what do they call them? Mark Miller just introduced another program. It was like on care workers or something, but they weren't care workers.
Yeah.
They're basically glorified babysitters. And, you had to prove, they lowered the English standard. So you're not bringing in people that understand the language, which is going to cause further risks. If they can't communicate with, if they're watching a child or if they're watching a senior and something happens and they can't communicate with 911 operators, there's no value to that. So we're leaving, our, the people that require the most amount of attention, we're leaving them in the hands of people that don't have the capabilities of dealing with the same situations.
By the way, I think you're talking about the caretakers.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, Immigration Minister Federal, Mark Miller, had just introduced this. It was last week or the week before, where they're basically saying, no, we're gonna fast track these processes to get more nannies in. Or they call them caregivers, but the definition of caregivers is so vague that, and you have to have some work history. Well, we're not even really checking background checks, security checks for people that are coming into Canada. What sort of employment checks are we really going to be doing for these people? And that's what's troubling. You got to have some experience in being a babysitter before you can come into Canada fast tracked without being able to speak, one of the national languages. And you have no actual skill. So it's another way of, again, bringing more people in that are potentially going to be a burden on the system. They're, get the automatic healthcare, going to be into the automatic social services. Nobody's going to be monitoring their employment record. If somebody's living inside of your house, taking care of your children, you're paying them. Are you going to pay them in cash? Or are you going to pay them, so that they actually have to submit or remit taxes? Or are you going to be paying them legitimately so that they do have to pay taxes? Is there any benefit to even doing this? And I don't believe that the answer on that is yes. One, we don't need more people. Two, we don't need more people that don't speak the language. And three, we don't need an additional burden on our already collapsing systems.
I think their main problem is that they're pursuing policies that Canadians are just rejecting. So they are bringing in more immigrants, and Canadians are saying, we don't agree with this. This is too much, too fast. And they're turning around and they're saying, oh no, you, the common people, you don't understand that we got problems. We have an aging population. I don't know. We have a shrinking tax base. So they're coming up with these reasons that people don't fully accept, but they just keep doubling down and tripling down. Like you mentioned the caretakers. Before that, there was the 5,000 refugees from, what was that, Palestine? Like they're just coming out and they're passing these edicts. They're like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And we're like, well, we don't think you should do that. And they're like, no. You don't know what you're talking about. We know what we're talking about. You peasants, just sit down.
Well, yeah, and then when we learned that 5,000 didn't mean 5,000 people, it actually meant 5,000 families under no specific definition, where it's, what was it, like 4.7 or 5.4 members per family. So that number grows dramatically when you increase it from 5,000 as individuals to 5,000 families, because that, we go from 5,000 to potentially 25,000 people in a heartbeat. And taking in another 5,000 people right now is a tough situation. I know in Calgary, we've increased our population by like 5% over the last couple of years, like in Alberta. And that's too many people too fast. And what we're seeing right now is that, we have a broken water main break inside of the city. And this has been going on for a week now, just over a week, where we're under water restrictions. So they're trying to densify. Meanwhile, the entire city is left on water restrictions. And then even when we're off, even when they get the repairs done, is the city's talking about continuing on with these water restrictions. So two points that really conflict and really clash hard is we need to densify the cities, but our infrastructure can't support what we already have. How does it even make sense?
Well, they're burning their candle at both ends. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I kind of want to go back. I'll come back to the Calgary thing, but the Palestinians that they want to bring in, that doesn't even tie into the aging population argument, because I'm assuming these guys have no skills. They have no money. So you're not even, fleecing them like the federal government does with most immigrants, where they just, give us this much money and you can come, we'll sell a citizenship. So it's not adding to the tax base. So I don't, short of saying that's purely ideological, I don't know why they're doing that. And then to tie it into your Calgary story, this is getting a little conspiratorial, but a lot of people are saying like they realize the threat that's coming out of Calgary. Maybe Danielle Smith is not the saint that people thought she was, but she's still much more liberty-minded. She supports individual liberties more than other provinces, and they're thinking, all right, let's just flood this city. Let's turn Calgary into Edmonton. Let's change the voter demographics.
Well, and that's the only benefit that I can see that, and I don't use benefit for benefits of Calgarians or Albertans specifically, but that's a benefit to the federal government is by densifying our population with lower income earners that, again, socialists that support more free shit coming to them. And the same problem is always going to exist, is that eventually you're going to run out of other people's money to support these things. Where does the money come from to continuously feed these programs? We have children that are going to be paying for a lunchroom program that the Liberals are introducing that aren't even born yet, that are going to be paying off the deficit throughout their entire lives. Well, how does, all they're doing is deferring payments until a child turns 18, making their life more expensive throughout the rest of their lives. The longest part of their lives, from 18 to death, is the biggest part of their lives. And with, I want to say this, with the average age of mortality in decline, people aren't living as long. Our healthcare isn't getting better. We're not sorting through a lot of these problems. People are more plagued with metabolic issues and more reliant on pharmaceutical pharmaceutical interventions. And, so this longest part of their lives from, the age they turn 18 through their working lives to 65 or 67, or, it's probably going to be 75 as the mandatory retirement age for kids that aren't even born yet, is basically going to be just a fucking terrible life. There's no way to put it. No way other to think about it. You will own nothing. You will not be happy. You will bust your ass, and you'll never come out of the hole. You'll never stop digging yourself out of the hole that the government's dug you into.
Okay, I 100% agree with you. And there's a couple of things that are happening that are really bad, and no one's really talking about it. One is, I view it as a form of slavery. Like, you cannot be born into debt. That there's got to be a law against that. I mean, if you get into debt, I understand that, but your parents can't pass the debt on to you, which is basically what the national debt is. That's one of the problems. The other problem is, you could start the clock in 1974 when we switched over from a sovereign state bank to commercial banking, but like, we've just racked up debt. So through inflation, instead of going to the taxpayer and saying, we want to build, I don't know, gay pride, or we want to build bike lanes across the entire country. It's going to cost $1 trillion. And the taxpayers are like, no, we don't want that. You just go on and printing $1 trillion and you're building the bike lanes, and the people are none the wiser. So you've eroded the democratic system because you've essentially taken the people out. So the bureaucrats are doing whatever they want. That's another major problem that I don't think we really grasp the seriousness of it.
Yeah. Now, you're, from the Western Canada sort of things, being inside of BC, and this is what we're going to talk about is, kind of what's going on. So you're in a, I'm going to say majority liberal to liberal light province, liberal-minded people. And that's starting to shift to a lot more conservative. But you'd mentioned that the conservatives that you're seeing inside of BC aren't really true conservatives. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what's going on in the actual, on the provincial side of things, what we're seeing in BC?
Sure. Let's just focus on the election right now, the provincial election. So we have three parties in order of popularity. They were the BC NDP party, and they still are the most popular. And then it was the BC United, but they've slipped. And then third was the BC Conservative Party, but now they've moved past the BC United Party. So the BC Conservative Party, what happened is, I'm going to call them the Freedom Movement, the people that disagreed with the lockdowns. They saw the BC Conservative Party as their savior, as their vehicle through its leader, a charismatic gentleman by the name of John Rustad. They saw the ability to oust the BC NDP and take back their legislature. It didn't really work out that way. So there was a woman by the name of Jan Webb. She put out a controversial tweet. Shouldn't have done it. This is an election season, so immediately they got rid of her. All right, fine. Then there was she's a wonderful woman. I wouldn't have put out
over
that
a tweet.
Yeah, but the tweet was like somebody said that the vaccine, COVID will kill you, and she came back and she said, no, actually, the vaccine is what's going to kill you. So okay, fine. It's not the right thing a politician should say. A few days later, or a few weeks later, Dr. Stephen Malthouse, who was critical of the vaccine mandates, they announced him as the candidate for a riding. Instantly, there's like a hit campaign against him, and it was prepared. They went through every post he made. They put it on social media, and John turned to Stephen, the leader, turned to the candidate, and he said, "Listen, I'll back you if you want me to, but what do you think we should do? We should think about the party." And the candidate's like, "All right, fine, I'll resign." So, I mean, it's not like they sacked him, but to me, if a leader is not loyal to his team, that's problematic. And now fast forward a few weeks after that, maybe a month ago, a lot of these people that were in the BC United Party, they started jumping ship. They realized that the BC United Party is falling in the polls, and they're like, I have a greater chance of winning, which is code for, I want to keep my pension and my job and, the notoriety it provides me if I switch over to the BC Conservative Party. So you get these people coming over. Like, one of them was actually a former BC NDP, not even BC United. And she believed in all of this socialism that the BC NDP party supported and pushed, until that socialism came back to bite her in the form of drug use, and there was too many vagrants around her property. So she's like, I disagree with this. I'm joining the Conservative Party. Not conservative. When I say conservative, I mean limited government. BC United Party, same thing. These guys are middle of the road, left of center, go with the flow, sort of like the Federal Conservative Party. Don't rock the boat, get our pension. Now they're coming over to the Conservative Party, and I don't know what's going to happen. There's other problems too. The president of the BC Conservative Party, she's quite young, quite naive. She didn't handle the termination of those two candidates very well either. It was not a diplomatic manner of doing it. And I've heard it. I have it on good authority that John Rustad's advisors are not giving him good advice. And John Rustad is stretched to the max. This was a tiny party. It blew up too quickly. He's running everything. Everything's on this poor guy. So he's no spring chicken. He's an older guy too. He might be 60, maybe older. So those are the problems. And every time I bring it up, people get angry at me. They're like, "Hey man, shut up. We got to get the BC NDP out." So.
Yeah, and do you think that the shift away from the NDP is because of the locally what's going on inside of the province, Or do you think that the NDP federal coalition with the Liberals is also a portion of the downfall of the BC NDP support?
It's a little bit of both. So for example, the BC Conservative Party, to my understanding, is not affiliated with the Conservative Party. If Pierre Poilievre gets in and for the next 8 years he turns this place into like a, I don't know, a right-wing fascist gulag, it'll affect the BC Conservative Party just because the name is in there. So yes, that does bleed over. And there is so much hatred for Trudeau right now. Like I've never seen this level of hatred in my life in this country. That does impact it. But they did other things that are, you know, they annoy people. So a small example would be this empty homes tax, or like the empty homes tax, the speculation tax. Initially, they marketed it as targeting Hong Kong Chinese billionaire investors. Like it was very racist the way they did it. But like these Chinese, they're coming over, they're buying up the land, they're leaving it empty. Well, maybe true. All right, fine. And then they switched it and they started applying it to all Canadian citizens. So now what happens is if you have a cottage somewhere in BC, you can't afford that because you either have to rent it out or you have to pay empty homes tax. And yeah, go ahead.
That's even on like you got to have a cabin out at the lake. You have to either have that as a full-time residence, or you have to rent it out, or you have to pay taxes on it.
So I don't want to go on the record saying that some Liberal Party supporter will come out and say payment. No, that depends on the municipality or something. But like downtown Vancouver, for example, if you have a condo, I know you have to do that. West Vancouver, I know for a fact you have to do that because there was a conflict where it's for the elderly. Like West Vancouver, these homes are elderly. They say you can't rent it out. Well, if the bylaw says you can't rent it out, but the province says you must rent it out, it's a conflict of interest. So that's an example that I can prove that it's there. Whistler, I believe it's the same thing. Like it depends on the town, but they're just rolling it out and people are getting wiped out.
And that's insane. And they did something with the Airbnb out there too, didn't they? Or they were working towards it?
Yeah, again, this goes back to what I said. This is the central thesis that I have: is government's just getting too big, and you have some girl, gets money together, buys a place, and wants to rent it out with Airbnb. He gives her an income of like $800 a month, but then the government comes in and says, no, you have to have a license. No, you can't rent it out here. So Whistler right now, I believe, is exempt from that. But of a lot of other places in BC, you cannot rent out through Airbnb.
Yeah, it's insane. See, I know, I'd even talked to, I'm going to say some conservative type folk here in Calgary. Not a lot of them, but I've heard the comment a couple of times, is that they would actually go through the number of empty Airbnbs in their communities and said that we could solve this housing crisis by shutting down Airbnbs and forcing these people to rent these things out. And to me, I look at anybody that call themselves a conservative and say, what right does the government have to come in and tell me what to do with my property? I have two vehicles that I have to pay my insurance on, that I have to pay the upkeep on. Those are my two personal vehicles. What if the government then comes in after they do the same thing with properties and says, well, you're not using your vehicles, so you have to rent out one of your vehicles because it has to be in play. Like, the idea of somebody telling me what to do with the property that I've purchased seems ludicrous. And I mean, I wouldn't even know what to call that. It's not forced sharing. That's along the lines of like heavy communism, and then enforced through taxation is I'm going to go with fascist. It goes against the will of the people. It goes against the will of the property, right? What you own, what you've worked for.
Well, what you're making is a private property rights argument. If you look at Ireland, there's a outside party that's running there on an anti-immigration platform, and this is their argument. Like they're rolling this out in Ireland. They're coming in. They're saying, "All right, you have this empty room, and you should rent it out." And the guy, he made a hyperbolic example. He's like, "But you got this like 80-year-old Irish woman, and they come in and say, Hossein and his 3 wives wants to move. You have to rent out your room." And like the lady doesn't know that person, right? But more to the point, you're right. It's a property right. It's an erosion of property rights, and I think we have no one to blame but ourselves. Like, we've let this happen. Like, look at seatbelt laws. Like, who's the government to tell me I have to wear a seatbelt? Now the damn thing beeps out of control if I don't put it on within like a millisecond of starting the engine.
It gets progressively more aggressive.
Oh, it's so annoying. Yeah, you got to like put the seatbelt behind you. And but anyway, there are other arguments like drinking and driving. This is another one. They're telling you when and how you can operate your car. I just don't see. Now I'm talking about DUIs, like where they just do the stops and check you without a probable cause. That's also to me an invasion of your private property, but definitely with homes. And I'll end by saying this. My friend, he's got I don't know, like an RV park, like a mobile RV park kind of thing, and people come and they rent the space. And he goes, every single one of those in BC that are coming are ones that got evicted from their property. And the reason they got evicted is not because they couldn't pay their rent, or I don't know, the rents went up or whatever. It's because the landlords are like, it's just too risky for me to have a tenant. Like, they come in and you cannot evict them, even if they don't pay rent. So this is the problem that government has caused, and their solution is more government, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and along the lines of the, I'm not sure what you'd call it, or can't remember what you called it, where they're forcing people, the empty house tax. I'd seen the ideas being proposed in different ways throughout Canada. So your property taxes, and this is one of the ideas that I think they were looking at. They're going to look at the size of your property, see that you only have a single family dwelling on there. But then instead of taxing you on that single family dwelling, you're going to now be taxed on what that land could actually be used for. And they're going to jack up your rates. And the other thing that I've heard is because the city already has an idea of, what you have for houses, or, one, people living in your house through your census. Two, the amount of rooms that you have in your house, is that they're actually discussing, or has been discussed, that if you have empty space and it's not being used. So this isn't even like an empty apartment. This is literally in the house that you live in. If you have too many rooms, you're going to be taxed on those additional rooms if you're not renting those things out. And that's to help deal with this housing crisis that the government themselves have created. So they want to not only import the problem, they want to export it into your family space. And having been a parent and, now being an empty nester, my kids have moved out. I've taken one of the rooms and converted it into my office. The other room we keep as a spare room. So when we have people coming over from out of town, or if they come over and they stay too late, we have a couple of beverages, they can sleep over if they want. It's by way of our convenience. And for the most part, it's like a dressing room for my wife. So the house is being fully utilized, but I'm not sure it's going to be utilized in the way that the government would like it to be utilized. They want to shrink down my space so that I can offer my space to somebody that I don't necessarily want or know living in my home. And I don't want to share my bathroom with somebody else. I don't want to rent out a room. If I wanted to do that, I could already do that. But to force people into those situations, again, not saying that they are right now, but just having the discussion disgusts me.
I always say this goes back to sovereignty, and it goes back to agency. Like who's sovereign? Right now, the government is sovereign. They can do whatever they want. We don't have any agency, like you said. Like you cannot, in BC, they're outlawing, or they've already outlawed gas stoves in your house. How far is this going to go? Here's one you might not know. 40
I didn't know
years
the gas
ago,
stoves one. So in BC, they've outlawed gas stoves inside of people's houses?
I don't know if they've outlawed them already, but all they really have to do is they change the building code. So they say we're no longer allowing gas stoves, and they just phase them out. And they do these things. If you want another more extreme example, if you have a creek running around alongside your property, that you get like a hill, whatever that's called, they just came and passed the law, and they said, they changed it from the top of the hill, set back like 40 feet or 30 feet. That's an easement. You can't build anything there. Like that is a property theft. That's a property takings. Basically, if you go to sell the house, first thing they're going to do is, okay, what's the bylaw? Oh, really? Well, I can't build there. 60% of my property is gone. I'm not going to not going to pay $1 million for that. I'm going to pay 400,000. So they are doing these things in Vancouver, in BC, and we're allowing it to happen because we've just been brainwashed to believe that, you know, from time immemorial, we've had these things called zoning, and we've had these things called bylaws and, you know, building codes.
And, you know, I think the original intent behind the zoning and bylaws was to prevent the exact same thing that they're undoing right now, right? They didn't, you know, having the double wide properties, which wasn't unique, you know, 30 years ago, is now non-existent. And, you know, it's less and less, more predominant. And inside of Calgary, they've changed building laws. So you have what are called zero clearance walls, which, you know, your roof is basically almost hanging over your neighbor's yard. And you can walk between two houses, outstretch your arms, and touch two houses. Now, I don't see a good benefit to that, because inside of the building codes, they've changed a lot of other things that have made the houses. And I know you guys are facing some challenges with the forest fires and stuff out there, but they're changing them and putting them in so tight here that if a house goes up, a community is going to burn down if one catches fire. And I think in BC, they're starting to go away from what they call stick frame in high fire risk areas, because insurance companies can't keep up. So what that means is, you know, that concrete board that you only normally put in a bathroom to keep it, you know, make sure your drywall doesn't mold and rot. They're making people put this on the outside of houses. And what basically happens is you still end up cooking everything that's inside of the house because of the extreme temperatures, but the structure remains, which makes no sense. But I think they're moving a lot more towards that, from what I've heard, again, inside of BC circles, as to what they're doing. They're putting in things that should be, or that sound practical for the sake of sounding practical, but now you're building a more expensive home that still has no more advantages to building, you know, something that's a little bit more cost savings.
I think they just don't care because there's no incentive for them to care. So they can come out and they put out a tweet and they say, we're making the community safer for you, and people buy it. But no one's gonna say yes, but in 10 years at this rate, the property values will increase this much because the cost of housing is going to go up because of the materials that we're using. For example, in Vancouver, they changed the law. So now every unit renovations, you have to add sprinkler systems. That's a cost. And there's no pushback to them. There's no disincentive for them to just. It's like you're in charge of an engineering department and you have a blank check, unlimited budget, and you can do whatever the hell you want. That's basically what how they're operating right now. Yeah,
they're extending again, it's another form of taxation through restriction. They're making life more expensive for people that already are struggling to afford living inside of the, you know, certain areas, certain communities right now. And then what happens is then, you know, when we look at, you know, the central provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the affordability is still here in relation to what it would be, say, compared to Vancouver or Toronto, Ontario in general, British Columbia in general. So now we see people, you know, they'll sell their house, you know, their 1,400 square feet for $2.2 million, move into Calgary, spend $500,000 on a house or $750,000 on a house, and buy up the more affordable properties, so that other people that are already inside of Calgary that had banked and saved and tried to obtain their own home, they're now struggling to get into these places. And builders already can't keep up inside of the province. You know, when I was inside of the building circles, you know, your time of purchase to possession with some select builders was 2 years. There's other places, you know, they're building these condo type places where, yeah, you can get into them, but you're paying $350,000, $400,000 to live in a shoebox. And then on top of that, then you're paying condo fees. Well, the building's brand new when you move into it. But what a lot of people are finding out is 5 years after, because of the quality of the construction, or because of the materials that were selected, or because of the speed of building, is that there's definite problems that they already have to address. And through these definite problems, then your condo fees go up. So you don't own these things. You're renting forever. And it's the same with the modular homes. You still pay for the land that you're on, even if you own your own modular home. So you never fully own. You're always forever renting. You're renting at a price that's not rationalized. The problems that your neighbors create are now definitely your problems, and we're not getting the quality for what we should be seeing. We need to rein this in, go back to a little bit of common sense, and like you said, is do more of an impact assessment. What is this going to cause? If we decide to tell everybody that they have to have a sprinkler system inside of their homes, what is this going to do for the cost of properties? Is that going to be a net benefit? Are more houses going to be saved through these things? And if it's going to cost this much more, are more people going to be able to do this? So there has to be an impact assessment instead of just these blanket bullshit policies. Like even with the Calgary water, once we're off of the restriction because of this busted pipe, they're talking about permanent water restrictions. Well, we're just coming into summer, and they talked about a water shortage for Calgary. They talked about this in March. So they'd said that, by May, we might be under water restrictions. Meanwhile, we're still getting snow. I think it snowed into like Fort Mac last week. They had snow in Alberta. Okay, that's a long way away from Calgary. I get it. But we've had a fairly moist season. Well, it started to dry out because we're in more of the summertime now. People have bought their bedding out plants after the May lawn to get them into the ground because we know it's probably not going to be as cold. We're not going to see as many of the sub-zeros. People would have fertilized their lawns. People would have got things going. But now, even when we get full use of water back, the city still decides that they want to turn Calgary into a barren wasteland by, prohibiting me from having a garden because I can only water it twice a day, prohibit me from having a nice lawn, outside flowers, from having a nice yard. Whereas if they put in a 4-plex or a 6-plex or an 8-plex into a property like mine, then instead of having, just the people inside of my house that are using the water and, only watering the lawn a few times a week throughout, short summers, 4 months, whatever, then what they're going to have is they're going to have 365-day per year usage of people with dishwashers and washing machines and showers, and they're going to be using more water inside of the spaces while they're restricting people like me from having a nice yard. There's no impact assessment. And even when we did try and speak out, we had the largest uprising against city council with this. It was never decided. It was never put forward as a mandate for I think it was for one city councilor candidate, but it was never an idea under the mayor. And instead of having a plebiscite, they allowed us to have our voices heard down at City Hall for I think it was over the course of 10 days. And it was something like 70% of the people that went to speak, and higher for the amount of people that submitted a written response. They were against it. They still wouldn't hold a plebiscite, and they still pushed ahead with the blanket rezoning anyways. We don't get our voice. We don't get our agency. And as far as I'm concerned, if there's taxation without representation, that's theft.
No, it is definitely theft. Like some people say, taxation's extortion, but when they're taking it from you and using it against you, I think that's theft. What I wanted to say was, in the 90s, when government was smaller, people had more faith in the government. They trusted the government. So when the government came and said, we're experiencing a drought, and on odd days, we get the odd numbered houses use water, and then even days, exchange over.
Yeah.
Nobody doubted that because the government was small and it ran effectively. Now they've just gotten so big and so ideological, and just the degree to which they've lied to us the last few years, like nobody believes them anymore. So when they say there's a drought and we're going to have to continue, with this limited water usage, and then they turn around, they're like, we're going to densify the city. There's only so much like blatant lies that people will take before something's going to
go. For people are going to take to the streets with pitchforks, and how we haven't gotten there yet is far and beyond me. Because I've even seen, I think it was Environment Canada came out with a statement that, Canada is warming at the 2 times the rate of the rest of the planet because of population. Well, what populations? Like, is BC heating up faster than Manitoba or Saskatchewan because they have more dense population? Is the GTA heating up faster than Calgary? Because if you're making it on population and you're assuming that climate change is restricting itself to invisible borders that, you know, we as a people have assigned, you know, countries and provinces and cities to, and if you're going off of hard metrics like the number of people and what's being used, then why aren't we seeing these exact same things? Like, how is this narrative even believable?
Again, it goes back to what I said. Like, people have lost faith in the government because they're ideological, and it's not just the government. All of us do this. So we have a certain worldview, a belief. So mine is, you know, individual rights, property rights, sovereignty agency, and I just go find the data that supports my argument and I put it out there. But with the government, they have force backing that data. Like, they actually have the law enforcement, the tax authorities. So it's really, really annoying when they come and tell me, like, Canada is heating up at twice the rate of everyone else. I'm like, oh, really? Well, what about that article that said, you know, Finland was heating up twice the rate? What about the one that said, like, Abu Dhabi was heating up twice the rate? So all of them are lying. They're just cobbling these things together, and people are just sick of it. Personally, I think I know what they're doing. Like, they take the thermometer and they put it in downtown Toronto. Well, I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but if you cut down all your trees and you pack 2 million people in a concrete jungle, it's probably going to be a few degrees warmer than you know, in the forest in West Vancouver.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by putting more people in, that's another one of those arguments. Is that they say that Canada, you know, has the highest, one of the highest GHG per capita as the rest of the planet, but they don't look at our net output. They only look at the per capita. So if you increase the per capita by increasing the population, then what's going to happen with our output of GHGs? They can only go up. The idea behind net zero, they still can't even tell us what the net zero will do. What benefits are we going to see if we do hit net zero? Because the hottest temperatures and the coldest temperatures on the planet haven't been present for at least 110 years. I think it was 1914 was the coldest recorded temperatures, and 1919 or 1913 was the hottest. The hottest is in, like, Death Valley, like, it's in a desert. But if it's been over 100 years, and we've seen the size of the population of the planet grow by what, from 1.5 billion to, what are we at, like 8 billion now? If we've seen that much more population and we still haven't seen the same temperatures as we have 100 years ago, how can we say that this is actually changing? And they don't really talk about the change. They talk about the median change. So it's not the you know, in Canada, we can live from minus 40, you know, we see these temperatures, minus 50 with wind chill, up to plus 40, you know, plus 43, and it's not outrageous. You know, it's not something that's unheard of inside of Canada. So we've got, you know, basically a 90-degree temperature sweep where all life sustains. Bees still come back, you know, spiders, ants, plants, grass, you know, things that we planted outside still live, as long as we, you know, maintain them and don't destroy them. But they're worried about this median temperature that they can't even really prove is changing. And all it basically means is it's not getting as cool at night, but it's also not getting as hot during the day. And they're worried about a temperature in the middle where all life has already been sustained anyways, you know, with the absolute extremes. It's lunacy. Anybody that looks at this and says, yeah, that's probably what's happening, I don't even know. I mean, there's a lot of profanity that I'd like to throw towards these people.
So, Sheldon, I find if we approach this climate narrative logically, it doesn't make any sense. I agree. But it's a religion. It's a religion to these people, in the sense that, you know, like there's a certain premise that they have to believe that the world is getting, you know, climate is getting warmer. They call it climate change to get away with it. But CO2 is the reason that's driving this global warming, and it's catastrophic. So if you believe those three things, everything else that they're doing makes sense. You're trying to attack that premise. You're like, no, no, no. CO2 has been higher in previous years. You're saying, no, no, no. Temperature has been higher in previous years. And when you say that, they always have an answer for that. Well, they'll say, yeah, but there weren't humans back then 100 million years ago. They'll say, yeah, CO2 might have been higher, but the CO2 we're experiencing right now is because of the Industrial Revolution. So the rate of change of the CO2 is higher than it was in previous years. It might not have been true. But the problem, basically what I'm saying is they have a conclusion and they're just trying to get to it. So whatever you say, it'll just bounce off them.
Yeah, confirmation bias, and then pack in statistical information that's not actual statistical. That's the same that we've seen throughout COVID. These were projections. They said, well, if then when, so many people are going to die. And, they always had these astronomical projections so that they could rationalize the measures that were being used. And then they would pat themselves on the back when of course these astronomical projections never came to fruition. They said, see, we're doing a good job. Meanwhile, flattening the curve for 14 days took 2.5 years. You guys still have some pretty extreme, just kind of moving off some of these subjects. You guys still have some pretty extreme, because this ties into the politics, the healthcare inside of British Columbia. Pretty obscene mandates on healthcare employees, in that they still are forced into having the COVID jabs, despite all information showing that there's been zero benefit. There's only been additional risks assigned to these things. People in BC that work in the healthcare industry, while your healthcare is collapsing, are still not being afforded a job. How do people in BC come to terms with that? Like, are they aware of what they're seeing? And it was Bill 30 or something, wasn't it, in BC that allowed that to happen?
Let me answer your last part first. Tonight, I'm going to dinner with some of my friends. Fancy restaurant, High's Steakhouse, if anybody knows where that is in Vancouver. These two, they're lawyers. They go to work. They work very hard, 5 days a week. They like to unwind on the Friday night. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in anything else that's going on. With regards to the healthcare, it is far, far worse than you think. I think they've fired about 6,000 unvaccinated nurses. That's not even counting the other healthcare practitioners. They're refusing to hire them back because the law in BC states that you have to be vaccinated to work. They have 2022, they gave $100 million to the BC Nurses Union. And part of that money, the whole purpose was to hire foreign nurses. So you have taxpayer money going to a union that's harming, and they're supposed to be fighting for those 6,000 nurses, but it's harming them by hiring foreign nurses. So I think that's the long and short of it. You also have Bill 63 that eroded doctor-patient confidentiality, but maybe you have some questions.
No, and what I think a big part of what was troubling about it is not only, we're healthcare practitioners, whether it be nurses or doctors or whatever. Not only were they fired, it's just that there's a gag order that was slapped on through the same bill. So that if they couldn't talk about anything other than what was approved by the government. And they did that because, the number of people that came out against the vaccines and said, they're not working or they are harming people. Now they've basically proactively put in legislation that says, this is what you're allowed to say. And if you say anything different, you'll be fired, you can lose your license, and then you'll be fined on top of it. The only thing they didn't really threaten is jail time.
They've done that in Vancouver now, in BC. $250,000 and I think 2 years in jail if the doctors don't give confidential medical records to the government. So they've done that. Going over what you just said, I hadn't heard about the gag order, but I see two problems here. One is judicial activism, where the government is just deferring, the courts are deferring to whatever the government says. So the courts are saying, well, if the government says this is a once in a lifetime pandemic with a horrendous death rate, and Joe Blow doctor over here is spreading misinformation, then obviously the government, I'm going to take whatever they're saying at face value. That's one of the problems, judicial activism. The other problem is what you and I have been talking about this whole show, property rights. If I go figure out if I become a healer and I figure out how to help people through medicine, I shouldn't have to beg the government to give me a license. That's what the colleges are, the College of Physicians. They approve your license. Now the government through the colleges, they're coming in and stealing people's licenses. This guy spent $500,000 getting a license. The government comes and takes it away. That's property theft.
Yeah, and not necessarily for doing anything wrong, just having an alternate voice inside of an immense arena. Because a lot of us, we're of the same thing. Now, when COVID was going on, a lot of people talked about ivermectin and vitamin D and on and on and on. And I was dragged into a lot of the ivermectin conversations for support, and I don't know anything about it, really, to be honest with you. I've never taken 10 seconds to do a lot of research on ivermectin. I don't know if it helps you with COVID. Maybe it does, and if it does, it's because it's reducing the amount of inflammation inside of your body. From what I've heard, again, like very little time have I spent doing this, because my idea is people that were healthy, had a healthy immune system, weren't going to actually have a problem. So I'm not going to pick the better of the pharmaceutical giants, ones that's producing ivermectin or one that's producing the mRNA jabs. When healthy people can maintain health, lower your inflammation, eat food that supports your body's immune system, it's an alternate health path, but it's also the same things that actually cures people away from metabolic diseases. Metabolic meaning you've consumed yourself into poor health. And when you consume yourself into poor health, the best way to deal with that poor health is to eat yourself back out of it. So, stop eating the garbage, sugary, processed bullshit. Go back to a more natural diet, reduce the amount of inflammation inside of your body, come down to a sizable muscle to mass ratio. Your immune system automatically kicks in. But saying something like that, and even if you're a nutritionist inside of EC, I'm not sure if they're under the same college as the College of Physicians and Nurses, because they are a healthcare practitioner. So if somebody said, listen, don't eat bread and it'll keep you safer from COVID, stay away from macaroni, and quit drinking orange juice because it's the same thing as having a Coke every morning. So if you cut out your pastas, your breads, and orange juice, there's a good likelihood that you're really not going to be impacted by this. Could those same people, and I don't know the answer to this, could those same people lose their licenses? Could they be forced into fines or paying in fines? I don't know. Like, this is where it's so troubling is that I think that a lot of these systems are corrupt. They want to keep control of the narrative. And the narrative is meant to just regenerate more business for them. Heart doctors supporting jabs that cause heart damage seems more like a job security program than it does in doing what's best for the patients. And that's exactly what we've seen. Some of the early conversations that I'd had, arguments I'm going to call them, with heart doctors, I'd say, well, it increases your risk of heart damage. Of course you're supporting it because it's job security. All the patients that you might lose for not doing your job effectively now, you're going to regenerate by forcing them into a product that's going to cause further heart damage. You're creating customers.
It's kind of like lawyers with the legal profession. They get behind closed doors with the judges and they complicate everything, and it's just, promoting themselves, more jobs for them.
Yeah, and I think even, I was in an accident. I don't know, this goes back 20 some years ago, whatever. And I was off work I was pretty banged up. Not on death's doorstep or anything, but, I went to a personal injury lawyer and, gave them my case. And then they had me, taking notes on a day-to-day basis and finding my restrictions and sending me to physiotherapy and all the rest of that stuff. And then, I went back to my lawyer and said, this is kind of what I'm looking at. And so far I'm actually recovered, to this degree and stuff. And they said, okay, well, we're going to start a claim for this. And I think, you think that your lawyer's going to battle. They're going to get you the biggest bang for your buck. Because, they're paid a contingency based off of that. And they said, well, who's your insurance company and who's their insurance company? And then the guy goes, yeah, you know what? I just had lunch with him yesterday. We'll come up with a good number for you. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like I'm wanting a gladiator. I'm wanting people to go into battle for me. I don't want you to go sit on my dime at, you know, Earl's Tin Palace, have a steak sandwich and a couple of martinis. I want you actually in there fighting for me, man. But he's like, nah, I just went for lunch. And they came back with some lowball bullshit offer. And it was like, you people are out of your mind. You know, I've lost over a year of my life by way of mobility. I'm going to have permanent pain for the rest of my life. And you're going to throw me this as an idea? And he goes, wow, well, you know, it's like, nah, you got to do better than this, man. You got to do better than this. But
it actually gets worse. It's worse than that. A lot of people who are in criminal law, they say the same thing about defense attorneys and prosecutors. Like, this isn't just that they run into each other in the courthouse. Like, they're just hanging out with each other. They're going out at night, and it's a huge conflict of interest.
How do you get fair representation like that? In the same way that, you know, how do we get fair representation from our politicians? Now, on that, and you know, I'm gonna dive way back, and then we're gonna get to your role in politics. Is, you know, when you talked about a lot of the United BC United Party flipping into conservatives, even though they're not conservative values. You know, I look at some of these things and I say to myself, can a politician change their mind? Are they allowed to do that? And if they're representing their constituents, then you can find politicians that will be on one side of the aisle one day and then flipping over to an ideal with the other side of the aisle. And I think the biggest problem that we're seeing in Canada right now is the coalition supply and confidence deal with the NDP and the Liberals, where there's no Liberals that'll cross the floor and there's no NDP that'll cross the floor. So they're 100% in tune with the party mandate. They're so tribalistic that even now that we're seeing treason inside of the House of Commons, we still have the NDP, to a certain extent, the Bloc, the Liberals, all basically shutting down the conversations on investigations into treason inside of our parliament. So when we look at, you know, situations where, you know, BC United are crossing the floor to Conservatives, is that because they're doing a better job by way of representing their constituents, or is that a small portion of it, or do you think that that's all bullshit and they're just doing 100% of everything to protect their own assets?
Sheldon, I don't know where your source of income comes from. I'm assuming you've run businesses. Maybe you're an, I don't know, electrician, plumber, engineer. You know, you have the skills to survive in the world. These people don't have those skills. So like, let's put some names to these people. Yara Sachs, she's the woman that got up and said honk honk is the new Heil Hitler. Pam Damoff, she's the one who was talking about vaginas and vulvas in Parliament. She recently came out and said she's getting threats against her. She doesn't know how to deal with it. I don't think these people could operate in the real world. So they just rally behind these parties. Another way I could answer that, if these people ran as independents, or if they ran for a smaller party like mine, the PPC, they would never get elected, because you have to get elected on your own merits. Whereas when you run under the party, these big parties, and you're under their brand, they can usher you over the finish line. And I think that's what's happening. I don't think this is that they changed their views. Like, maybe one, you know, like for me, it took me probably a decade to change my views from left socialist to what I am now, which is like an entrepreneur, business-minded, independent rights. This stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Fair enough. So now you're going in for the People's Party of Canada under Max Bernier. And, you know, in the early COVID days, you know, I'd seen him as being somewhat of a champion inside of his voice. But he does seem to be unelectable. And, you know, I'm not coming out against you or saying that there's anything horrendous with people who either run for the PPC or who support the PPC. The fact remains, and I'd even posted this on my Twitter time feed, is that Elizabeth May, crazy as she has 2 more seats than the PPC does inside of Canada right now. Now, that was like pouring like hot aluminum into an anthill. And I get it, because I mean, I'm on conservative and I'm one of the freedom people, so I have a lot of the freedom supporters. And I don't know if everybody assumed that I was PPC or nobody cared, because nobody's really asked. But I see a lot of things come up, against the conservative parties, against the UCP party, and a lot of people talking about the Uni party, and the only way to escape is through the PPC. But I don't see that there's a lot of support inside, or outside of smaller sects of people. How are you finding yourself for support inside of Whistler, BC, as a PPC candidate, or somebody that wants to be, enter into politics under the PPC banner?
I think people don't actually, like, they don't vote for policies, and they don't even vote for the candidate. I think they vote for the party brand. So they, you look at the Liberal Party, you like the shade of red, you like the font and the logo for the L. Same thing with the NDP, like you like the orange. So I think the PPC is suffering from a marketing, messaging, branding issue, and that's like the first thing that we have to change, because it's not the policies that are the problem. So you're asking me, how do I find reaching out to people in Whistler? Well, for like, the first problem is most people don't even know what the PPC is. So that's one of the things that we have to work on. The other problem, and maybe I'm being too honest here as a politician, but the other problem is a lot of us candidates, we just figured that because of the hatred of Trudeau and what happened during COVID, you could just coast on that, which is another way of kind of holding people hostage. You saying, we're the best, we're the only option, vote for us, and that didn't work either. So what we're trying to do now is to change the sort of the message of the party to say, listen, we are a pro-individual rights party. We have a vision for Canada. We need to return it to what it was, 40, 50 years ago, where you could run your business free of government intervention. Like, if you do that, people kind of open up to you. But if you come out and say, population replacement, immigrants are evil, COVID's a death jab, then no, that doesn't work for the PPC.
And messaging is always huge, because people are, to a certain point, stuck inside of where they are idealistically. And instead of having the conversations as being anti-liberal, coming out and being pro, again, whatever your platform is, seems to be a way that you can change minds. And saying, what benefits has the coalition, what benefits has supporting the NDP, what benefits has supporting the Liberal government over the last, you can call it 5 years. What benefits has that helped you with inside of your thing? And then you can open up some conversations into those sort of things too. But again, having your conversations is, again, I think equally as important. Now, you are going against heretics, like lunatics, that pull these soapboxes out, jump on them, and you say, you know what, we're for property rights, and then they just run up and they call you a racist. How do you deal with that? I mean, they're the ones that are doing the exact same thing that you're trying not to do, and yet they're still maintaining some support through their tribalistic banging of the drums with the same bullshit. How is it for dealing with some of these people? Like, what sort of resistance do you meet?
First of all, I'll say they're not the heretics. I am. You and I are. So the country is so far left. We're such a socialist welfare state that if you even try to say that you support small business, that you support the rule of law, it's almost like we're a heretic. When you're asking about pushback, I was involved. We were trying to recall our premier here in BC, David Eby, and I went. And
unelected.
Yeah, that's right. He's I don't even know you could call it appointed. He's the new leader after the previous one, Horgan, stepped down. So we go into his riding. It's an NDP stronghold, and you're trying to talk to these people, and they're like, oh, I'd rather have the NDP there than fascists like the Conservative Party or the PPC. So they're getting their messaging from the media. That's a really big problem.
Exactly, and that's what I mean by the media support. They can jump on these soapboxes and basically shout you down with a couple of insults on what things that should be common sense. Sorry, go ahead.
I find the only thing that helps, and I'm taking this lesson from Bruce Party, is to not talk about the actual issues. So take the vaccine. That's a perfect example. Like, I never tell people the vaccine's dangerous, whether it is dangerous, whether it's not dangerous, whether the government should have done what it did or they should have done differently. I kind of just take a step back. I'm like, why don't we imagine like a classically liberal country? Like, if you want to have the right, if adults have the right to put whatever they want in their body, whether it's heroin or whether it's the COVID vaccine, like, why are you forcing people to take one? Like, if you really want to go down that road, then let's just limit the size of government. It doesn't always work, but it's a better way of talking to these people than to just say like what they violated my rights during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, well, you have to, one, pick your battles, but then two, you have to pick the direction of the conversation that you want to lead it to, it being about open rights instead of it being a forced one way or another. And then, yeah, you do have to come across as like you're not lighting your hair on fire. And I think that, Max Bernier getting the moniker as Mad Max spent a little too much time doing that. What do you think about the party leadership of having Max Bernier? Is it detrimental to the party, or are you allowed to even talk about that? Like, do you think that the PPC might do better under different leadership? Do you guys have any conversations of, should we be putting this to a leadership vote? I mean, the Conservatives lost what should have been the easiest election to win in 2021 under O'Toole because he was weak. So, I mean, he was obviously tossed out on his ass, and they ran through the the leadership vote on that. Do you think that that's something that the PPC needs to do? Would it be a benefit, or is the PPC so Max Bernier that if they got rid of Max, the PPC would no longer exist?
I mean, your last question, you're basically saying that he is he's a strong pillar for the PPC. So I would agree. Like, if you kicked out Max right now, what's the party going to do? Because he is leading the party. What I'm trying to change is I'm going around to the candidates in the PPC and saying, guys, like, Canadians don't want weak leadership. So they don't want weak candidates that just parrot whatever Max says. Let's support Max by educating ourselves and coming in and actually talking about the issues, which is something that I think is lacking in Canada right now. So these leaders, it goes back to what I said, you run under the brand and you get people like Yara Sachs and Pam Damoff. Well, why don't we turn that around and let's say, we understand political philosophy. We understand, sound money and like all these major issues. We understand what the problems are with healthcare and education and immigration. And let's talk about it. Well, maybe we can undercut the competition, get around the media. That's one way we can help Max. I don't have a problem with Max. I know a lot of people say, first of all, they call us the grifter party. They say that Max is just taking the money so he can fly around the country. I'm getting schizophrenic messaging. Like, some people say Max isn't doing enough. Other people are saying that he's taking the money to fly around and do speaking tours. So I don't know which one it is. I've never had a problem where, and I'm being honest with you here. I've never had a problem where I was like, oh man, I could win if only Max did this for me. I could win if only Max did this differently. My main problems are, I just don't have enough time. I'm up against Leviathan with these big political parties. So I don't know. Does that answer your question, or do you want me to go into more detail about Max?
No. No, because, the thing about it is, whether I get along with Max or whether I don't, ultimately speaking, it's not a conversation that I need to have. I'm not a member of the PPC. I'm not a member of the CPC. I'm not a member of the UPC. I'm a member of nothing officially. So I don't want you to, say anything that might go against the party or that might have, some of your cohorts running for similar positions to go, well, why would he say that? So it's not about that. No. On the party side of things, would you guys put yourself as more right wing than the federal Conservative Party?
It's an excellent question, and I think it goes back to what I said. I think we failed as a party to message effectively. Partly it's because the media has labeled us as a far right wing Nazi fascist party. Like we want to kill everybody. But I would say that we're not a right wing party. So we're a party down the middle. We take some things from the left. We very much support labor. We support the middle class. We oppose corporate welfare. So I'll give you one example: subsidizing the wages of foreigners, immigrants. That should be a left-wing policy that the NDP should be championing, but I don't know why they're not. So that's one left-wing policy we have. We do have right-wing policies like immigration. Our view, I'd say on immigration, we're more to the right than the Conservative Party. But there's a lot of places where we're to the left of the Conservative Party. Take, for example, Bill C-70. That there was a whole kerfuffle yesterday with this bill that's criminalizing protesting. The Conservative Party is supporting that. The PPC, I mean, if we supported it, we'd just evaporate as a party. We'd cease to exist. So we're to the left of the Conservative Party on that one. What we really are is we're just a limited government party. I look at the Liberals, which are I think they're progressive, and I look at the Conservative Party. Let's call them conservatives. They want to take over the government so they can ram through their view for the world, their ideology. So let's take a really easy one is gay marriage. I'm going to be a little hyperbolic here, but the conservatives, let's just say they're old school conservatives. They're going to get in. They're going to say gay marriage should be outlawed. Progressives, the Liberal Party, they're going to get in. They're going to be like, no. We have to teach about gay marriage and gay sex to 1-year-olds, I don't know, 5-year-olds, whatever. They're using the power of the state to ram the stuff through. And we're kind of just saying, you know what? Why don't we just get government out of this? Like, just leave us alone.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I know you kind of picked on that as just like a hyperbolic thing, but I think that goes along the same lines of the abortion conversations right now. I'm not going to say the far left and the far right are direct opposition, but I mean they're not conversations that are having, but it's one of those things that the Liberals are banging the drums about. Now you'd said something about corporate welfare going to subsidize incomes of immigrants along those lines. Let's touch on that. So that's an idea that you support. So rather than, staying away from corporate welfare altogether, which is something that, why should my taxes pay to offer a job for somebody that just came into the country that no longer looks at me as a beneficial employee? Why would a Canadian get behind that? Or am I misunderstanding you?
I think you misunderstand it. I support the opposition of subsidizing taxes for foreigners. I support the opposition of subsidizing any taxes, any wages. Sorry. So
okay.
I think you misunderstood me.
I must have misunderstood because it sounded like you were supporting that. I was like, hold the phone. Where are we going with this? Because again, the corporate welfare, and we talked about our money not only being taken away from us, but being used as a weapon against us. And one of those things, when you said supporting labor, and these are political talking points. We support labor. And in Canada, what supporting labor from the left side basically means, or from the Liberals and the NDP, is it basically means supporting unions. And I look at unions, especially inside of public works. They work for the city, or they work for the province, or they work for the government in some capacity under whatever services they provide. As I look at having unions inside of those places as being of zero benefit, and that actually having unions there is an illegal taxation that Canadians never agreed to. So what I basically mean is inside of these positions, there's a lot of these positions that would get paid more working for the public sector than they would in the private sector. Pensions are better, benefits are better, blah, 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 whatever that looks like. But as a part of that, they have to pay into a union due. So each employee pays into union dues. Well, we're already working for the people that set laws on, workplace wages, on safety, on security, on bullying, on everything else. These are the people that make the policies. These should be the safest, most secure jobs on the planet already anyways. Having the unions in there has no benefits as far as I can see. But because these people are forced to pay into the unions, that's a taxation that comes out of the pockets of every Canadian, because we're the ones that are paying for those services that we as a whole never agreed to. I consider it illegal taxation. What's your thoughts on that?
I do agree. It's a very complicated issue. Like, you have unions in the private sector, and then you have unions in the public sector. So in the private sector, you could make an argument for unions giving collective bargaining rights. Maybe you could make that argument. Let's put that aside. When you're talking about the public side, that's taxpayer funded. So they're just if they get a raise, that raise is coming out of the public purse. So that's one problem. The other problem is the fact that they are a voting bloc, and they can go and lobby government to pass laws that favor them. For example, mandatory union membership. For example, the government collecting the union dues directly out of the paycheck and giving it to the unions. That's another problem. Another thing, this isn't necessarily legislation related, but when you become like the BC Nurses Union, when you go into these unions, you forfeit your right to outside counsel. And when you have a situation like what's happening right now, where the union is not defending its members and they don't have right to outside counsel, that's like they've been checkmated there. That's another problem I have with unions. Another problem is that whole get out the vote thing. So what the unions are doing now, either legally, illegally, directly, indirectly, they're going and they're electing people to school board positions because they can get out the vote. So all they have to do is you take a small chunk of their money and apply it to what they do best, getting people out to vote. And it's really interfering with our democratic process. So going back, you said I'm pro-labor, but labor is union. I think they've basically done a bait and switch. Like at one point when they were actually supporting the laborers, they're not really doing that anymore. And they've driven up the cost of manufacturing. For example, manufacturing's left the country. There's no more jobs. Like, they're hurting the people that they purport to help. And to cover this up, they're getting higher wages. The government has to print money to pay for these, and then you get inflation. So it's a big mess. And I don't know as a society how we turn this around, because it's not just the federal branch. It's not just the legislative branch. It also ties into like monetary policy. And so we have a lot of work to do.
And the collective bargaining thing is another thing. Now, you said you advocate for personal responsibility. So, I go out, I do something terrible at my job, or I muck things up, or I'm straight up incompetent, whatever that looks like, whatever reason that an employer would pick to fire me. I mean, I'm all for that. I'm not going to say I've never been fired. It's happened. But I'm okay. So I got fired, whatever. But on the collective side of things, and I've seen this in certain circumstances where it's in the private sector, where the private sector will defend, a union will defend somebody that ought not be in that job, creating actual safety issues. And I'd worked with a couple of guys from one of the concrete places in Calgary, and they said that's exactly what happened. Is this guy was, backing his cement truck up, and he was running over curbs, and he'd almost run over people, and then he'd run over signs and hitting other vehicles. And every time he would do these things, the unions would come to back and keep him on. These guys didn't want to be on the same crew that had to work with this guy, but that's what the unions were defending. So it was actually doing the inverse of what it was meant to do. And then on the second side, on the collective issue of the protections and stuff, we see Canada Revenue Agency, where they've got to work from homes from this hybrid work program. They're asked to come in for a third day to work out of the offices, this third day per week, and they're now in collective bargaining about, well, we want more money, and it's making our lives too hard to have to go into the office. Meanwhile, throughout the history of office work, the majority of it has been completed throughout a downtown community. These things bolster the economy because I think it supports the transport systems. I think it supports like the local convenience stores, the restaurants, the services, the dry cleaners. There's so much that's more supported when we have a collective core that basically has to go into work per day. Whereas when those things vanish, so do a lot of these businesses. And from that, we lose a lot of small business, we lose a lot of paychecks, while the while the collective bargaining power is working against the people that are paying them. So they're creating unsafe and biased workplaces that's harming the economy. While they're, what was there, like a 20 or 30% increase on civil servants under Trudeau? Like, it's been a massive bloating of civil service so that they can do the same thing, take more of our money to work harder against us.
First off, apologies if you can hear my dog in the background. I'm going to give him a thrashing later. I agree with you that the unions are a problem. They're just like, they don't add value. They might add some minor benefits for their member base, but they don't add value to society. You could imagine just a roaming, marauding gang of people going around and extorting business owners. That's basically what a union is. What I'm trying to say is, I don't know how to combat that outside of society and a culture. If we pass a law that we criminalize unions and we say you can't have a union, another party might come in tomorrow and they might criminalize speech. Like, unions are a form of speech, is what I'm saying. It's a form of expression. To me, dealing with unions is like dealing with somebody who's saying racist remarks. Like, you don't deal with it through the law. You deal with it through the society, through the culture, through the community, through family values. So if we had a strong family unit like we used to have decades ago, parents would. I remember in the 90s, like, we used to always make fun of people that work for the government. Even as early as grade 4, we'd say these are the laziest people on the planet. We used to make fun of people that were in unions. So if you have that culture, you can push back against that. But what's happened is that culture is eroded, and now people want the law to step in and do that. And I disagree with that. I think that comes with other problems. To your other point, which was 20% of the government, 20% of the workforce is working for the government. I think the problem is far worse if you consider corporate welfare, like what I said, subsidization of people's salaries, 30%, 40%. It's not sustainable. And I think people realize this, but they don't. Nobody wants to be the one that implodes the system. So they're letting this ride out. But I always ask people, like, what's going to happen to Canada in 50 years? If you just keep giving them, we have free healthcare now. Now we're giving free daycare. What if tomorrow, we give free dog care? Like, where's this going to stop? And there's no money. They're just printing it. It's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. There's no place up to go from there. Again, we can't dig ourselves out of the hole that they've already dug us into, right? So we're coming on the 2-hour mark, and I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, even though one Carolyn has basically mentioned that I talk too much. I'm sorry, Carolyn. Yeah, sometimes I do hoard the conversation. My apologies. You can give me a good thrashing in the comments section. But no, so and again, I'm not anti-PPC by any stretch of the imagination. I had you on the show because I wanted to have a conversation with you. You seem like a great guy. I do support you in your run. And I know others are going to probably have some questions for you, whether it's regarding the PPC or whether it's regarding yourself in general inside of the riding that you're in. Maybe just want to have some more open conversation. So the first thing is I'll write in the where to follow you on Twitter, but where else can people in the comments section here? But where else can people follow you to catch more of your voice, Payman?
You can check out my website, paymanascari.ca. I have a section, a views page. I basically go over, I think, 12 or 15 of issues that are really important to me. So I have little articles there. You can read more about that. Through that, you get the sense that I think the country is changing. I think we're finally maturing, and maybe older people don't want to hear this, but we're sick and tired of the previous generation, what they did to destroy this country through messaging and marketing and talking points. You see it after the great financial crash, what happened with people starting to get involved in monetary policy. And then we're talking about millennials and now, I guess, Gen Xers as well. So we want
Yeah.
real leadership. We want change. And yeah, paymentascari.ca.
Awesome. And then I know I've seen, or I've tripped across a couple of your video streams. So you do some streaming and have some conversations in the same way. I'm not the first time you've done this. If somebody was looking for more information just on your videos, is that just at paymentascari.ca, or do you have a YouTube channel? Or are you on Rumble, any other platforms that they can find you on?
Yeah, just go to paymentascari.ca and there's links to our YouTube and Rumble channel. The show is called In Lay Terms. We just take complicated esoteric concepts and we try to simplify them by talking to ordinary Canadians.
No, and that's exactly the same thing that I've tried to accomplish here. So I've mentioned before that I want to get together and have some panel discussions, and I'm hoping that you're open and available for when these things pop up. Because I think that I think Canadians enjoy the conversations. They want to hear different sides to the story. They want to hear what Canadians are actually focused on, not what we're being told to focus on. So two things. One, I want to thank everybody that's taken some time to view the live stream. I want to thank everybody that's going to be watching this, at their time. I mucked up on payment. I was supposed to have him on Wednesday, and I bumped him because I forgot that I had him, and ended up in conversation with Jamie Soleil. So that's why we had to do a morning call, because Payman's going out with a couple of lawyers and having a big fancy dinner at Highs in Vancouver. So thanks to all the viewers, and again, huge thanks for you to coming out, Payman, and having a conversation with us, man. It's been awesome. Every bit as interesting as I thought it was going to be.
Thank you very much for having me, Sheldon, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody have a great day, and yeah, we'll see you in the streams.